What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to The Fringe. We talked on a video the other day about how Mark Carney essentially wants tariffs in Canada. He favors them, even though he goes around the province talking about, or not the province, he goes around the country, sorry, my mistake, talking about, elbows up, and he's going to open up trade barriers, and he's going to get all these wonderful projects going that will unleash Canada's economic potential, yada, yada, yada. Again, it's all talk, no movement. We've seen nothing gets done. Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun actually comes out with a very good point as to why Mark Carney is doing all of this. In fact, it shuts it down, the argument, very quickly, but one that is actually very prominent into why Canada is going to continue having these problems. And a lot of people say, hey, Fringe, I don't like that you talk about boomers. I've always said liberal boomers, but one of the things that's going to come up in this is the potential issue that we have in this country when it comes to the demographics of who is putting people in charge in this country. I want to play what Brian Lilley has out here, because at the time of filming this video, it is actually trending on Twitter. Is Carney trying to block a deal with Donald Trump for political reasons? The Sun's Brian Lilley says maybe. Well, let's take a look at what he actually has to say, and then we'll talk about it.
What the Carney guys seem to be doing is not going for a deal for political reasons and then allowing these false narratives to play out. It looks good to thump your chest and say that you are looking out for Canada, but what about the people whose unemployment is on the line or who are already unemployed? It's up to 12.4%, I believe, in Windsor. We're about 9% in Toronto, 8% in Hamilton. Those numbers are going to go up. Up in Algoma, do you think Algoma Steel's going to stick around unless the government keeps bailing them out with these kind of tariffs? We need a deal. We need to be realistic and not petulant children who think that it's always better to fight with the Americans than work with them. But that attitude plays for a lot of Canadians, especially in the laptop class or retirees who don't have to worry about making sure that they've got a job next week.
So he kind of nails it right there as to why we're going to continue seeing this problem in Canada. In fact, many people saying, well, with Pierre Poilievre and his by-election going on, what happens when he comes back? How does he fight against Mark Carney? How does he convince Canada that he's worth running the prime minister's job in the next federal election? Many statistics have pointed towards the fact that if an election were held today, Mark Carney would actually seize a majority government. And one thing that people aren't talking about that we're going to get into is this article from the National Post that Mark Carney is pleasing old people and basically nobody else. Omit over 65 age demographic, and his poll numbers and approval ratings plummet. Keep in mind, now, I know people who live in Ontario, I can already feel you typing in the comments. People get mad when I say Southern Ontario, mainly Toronto, is responsible for who runs this country. It's their fault as to why Mark Carney is in power. What you have to take is the actual fact that in terms of the per capita regions in this country, the majority of the vote that matters in terms of who runs the country is from a portion of Quebec and then a portion of Southern Ontario, including Toronto. Not all Southern Ontario. I'm not saying everybody who lives there is bad. But if you're looking at how our elections are run, how the winner is decided, that portion of the country essentially decides who's in charge. When you think about people like the Brantford Boomer putting up his middle fingers and saying, yeah, we're going for Carney, it's exactly what Brian Lilley was talking about, that those who are in the older generation don't have to worry about what their jobs are going for next week. It's one of the main things that Pierre Poilievre went for on his campaign trail, saying that, hey, I'm going to make houses more affordable for the younger generation to get in, for them to move out of their parents' basements. And we're going to make it more affordable for people to get groceries. We're going to cut red tape on building new homes. We're going to axe taxes, everything else. Keep in mind that those in the 55 plus age demographic who already have their homes, who already have the majority of their mortgages paid down, who have retirement savings put away, statistically would not have to worry, especially those voting in the areas that gave Mark Carney his mandate, don't have to worry as much as those in their 20s, those in their 30s. I think that's a fair assessment. What you're going to see here, if you go back to videos that we've shown on this channel, even of Rebel News hanging out in Nepean, asking people, why are you voting for Mark Carney? I think everybody can remember the one gentleman who said, well, I have shares in Brookfield, so I hope that those go up. I think Mark Carney is the best guy to handle Donald Trump. This article really paints a picture as to what's going on and why Canada's not going to change. And in fact, this does nothing more than prove and push the narrative that I keep saying as to why the West is finished, why they've said, we're out of here. I think every province in the country should be saying they're out at this point. 3 months after the federal election, Prime Minister Mark Carney remains smack dab in the middle of his honeymoon period. An approval rating of 61%. Satisfaction with the government is at highs not even seen since the first term of Trudeau. Keep that in mind. Much of that vanishes, though, if you omit the one demographic that is always like Mark Carney the most, seniors. Again, I know there's senior viewers on this channel. We're not talking about you guys. We're talking about senior Liberal voters. Ledger poll from last month showed that while Carney would easily win a majority government in the new election, this was due mostly entirely to his widely outside support among voters 55 and over. In that cohort, 56% of respondents favored the Liberals against just 28% compared to vote Conservative. Again, they're set up for life. They don't care about the carbon tax. They don't care about groceries. They don't care about, the cost of a new home. They've double, tripled, quadrupled some of their investments on homes that they purchased in the 80s, 90s, etc. So they're living large. And I'm not saying that everyone who lives there, I always have to correct this because people say, well, you didn't go and point out the obvious in your video. You didn't state the obvious. Not all of us. Some of us rent. Some of us are on disability. Some of us have issues. I acknowledge that. But I'm talking about the people who are voting for Mark Carney. Again, use the Brantford Boomer as a template here. It says, everywhere else, however, opinions on the Liberals remain divided. Among respondents aged 18 to 34, the parties were at a virtual tie, 43% Liberal, 42% to the Conservative, which is more likely, again, of those of social justice warriors versus those with common sense. For those aged 35 to 54, it was a 41% Liberal, 40% Conservative. Again, almost a dead heat. And that's without having an elected leader, placeholder of Pierre Poilievre. This continues to make Canada the only Western democracy in which the usual demographics of political leanings have been flipped over their head. Everywhere from UK to Germany to the United States, young people continue to favor left-wing parties, while old people favor right-wing parties. Again, that's other markets. Canada and the United States, or Canada, sorry, typically votes Conservative, while the older population wants Liberal. In recent Australian general elections held a week after Canada's, the left-wing Labour Party won a surprise victory by sweeping constituencies disproportionately populated by younger voters. Some of Canada's peer countries may have Conservative parties that are gaining support among young people or are doing better than usual among voter cohorts, but Canada, remains the outliner as a place in which the average 25-year-old is more likely to vote Conservative than the average 65-year-old. So as time goes on, things are going to start to improve for the Conservatives if they continue to stay the course. The downside is that those 65 and older have to no longer exist on the planet. When we talk about people like Jagmeet Singh, who had a stranglehold on this country, preventing us from an election, it seems as if those with that age demographic, those who really have a lot of money tied up in their real estate, in their investments, again, their pensions, they're holding the country hostage because they haven't or are not currently experiencing a difficult lifestyle. It says, in one of the most surprising manifestations of the trend, a straw poll held among Canadian high school students ended up delivering a result that was more conservative than the general electorate. It had been up to teenagers, Canada would have had a conservative minority government. Final days of the election also featured the equally bizarre spectacle of conservative ads specifically targeting old white men in an attempt to arrest that cohort's stampede of Carney liberals. In the ad, two older men play golf while discussing the failing finances of their adult children. One tells the other that his son David has been experiencing a tough few years and can't seem to get ahead. I'm sure everybody saw that ad. Of course, we're not going to play it on the video. It says the phenomenon of young Canadians drifting right only started to show up in earnest after the 2022 election of Pierre Poilievre as Conservative leader. The 2021 federal election had generally broken down along conventional lines. Young Canadians mostly voted for progressive parties or stayed home. It was in the summer of 2022 when polls first began showing the near unprecedented phenomenon of the Tories scoring a plurality of support among those under the age of 44. Poilievre had championed the issue of housing affordability during his conservative leadership run, blaming the problems of the latter work of government gatekeepers holding back the designification of housing and development. He also aligned with youth in his support for the underlying goals of the Freedom Convoy, anti-mandate blockades, although the movement was broadly unpopular among Canadians, its most vocal supporters were among under age 34, many of whom had borne a disproportionate share of the consequences from pandemic lockdowns. An Ipsos poll from the time found that 61% of those aged 18 to 34 of Canadians may have disagreed with the tactics of the Freedom Convoy, but thought its underlying message was worthy of our sympathy. So you're starting to see here, like, it shows Pierre's impressions growing. But the fact of the matter is that no matter what polls they're doing here, they have basically laid out that if you get rid of the age demographic of 65 plus in those areas in Ontario that essentially put a prime minister in his seat, that have the controlling interest of the country, Mark Carney's lead drastically takes a nosedive. Am I suggesting that we get rid of all our senior citizens? Absolutely not. What I'm telling people is that when your frustration is mounting about tariffs, when you're thinking about how is it that we just allow all of these scandals to go on? Why are we allowing the government to behave this way? Why is it that nothing is being done, or people aren't getting off their butts? People aren't complaining. People aren't pushing the government to do better. That right there should tell you enough statistically that the age 65 plus crowd that's voting for Mark Carney isn't bothered by what's going on. I'm not suggesting again that age 65 plus don't care in general. Those who vote Liberal, those who are voting for Mark Carney, don't seem to be bothered because according to the information we have here, those who are in the 65 demographic, according to people like Brian Lilly, are those who are well looked after. They've got their bank accounts well padded, and it doesn't affect or bother them when they look at unemployment statistics, when they look at the cost of housing, when they look at the cost of food, because they're older. Their kids are possibly moved out. They don't have to pay for a big family to eat every night. It's just a few people. If this is the picture of what our country is going to look like, what other bizarre things do you think that these demographics are going to allow to happen to our country? You can see right now that Mark Carney's talking about recognizing Palestine as its own state. In fact, I've often questioned why the mass protests that are going on in our streets with Palestinian flags are tolerated while those of the Freedom Convoy were completely crushed and they invoked the Emergencies Act. If the age 65 plus demographic is satisfied with Mark Carney and these polls continue to show that, hey, Mark Carney's got a favorable lead going on, do you think anything's going to be done to quiet these protests? Do you think anything's going to be done to bring in better policy for Canadians as long as Mark Carney's optics are showing a favorable gain? I think it's very clear to say the answer is no. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Do you think that Pierre is going to have a chance of getting ahead at any point if this is the statistics we're working with? What do you think about the landscape of Canada moving forward based on the information that we have? What do you think are the odds that things will change? If it's your first time here, I hope this video's earned your subscription. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a thumbs up and a comment down below if you enjoyed the content. YouTube's censoring everything lately. They don't like us talking about the government, so anything you do, whether it's subscribe, like, comment, all of the above, helps out the channel tremendously. Turn on your bell for all notifications. Join me live here on the channel twice weekly now for 2 live shows, Unhinged Fringe on Wednesdays, Friday Night Fringe on Fridays, where I'm joined by a plethora of co-hosts as well as Mrs. Fringe on Friday nights to talk to you guys about everything happening in politics. I always look forward to chatting with you guys each and every week to hear what you have to say outside of making these videos. I most importantly look forward to chatting with you this Wednesday and this Friday night, starting at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, here on the channel each and every week. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll catch you on the next one.